Hello, I'm Bailey Bain and I'm here to talk to you today about living your soul story. When you were a child, did you like fairy tales? Did you have a favourite story when you were little? Maybe you can remember what it was. Maybe you can remember what happened in that story. Fairy tales are strong stuff. They look fluffy, but they're harder than heroin. On the surface they seem simple, but they deal with powerful material. They're stories that have survived the test of time because they deal with common childhood experiences. The cruel stepmother, the wicked ogre, the prince whose true nature is concealed. Your favourite fairy tale probably influenced you very deeply. It might even say a lot about who you are today. Did you like Jack the Giant Killer, climbing the beanstalk and stealing the goose that lays the golden eggs? Or perhaps Puss in Boots, that clever cat who fools everyone and ends up marrying the princess? Perhaps you identified with the ugly duckling, that little outcast, waiting to be appreciated, waiting for your time to come. Or maybe Snow White, working hard for her 7 little men, though she does end up getting saved by a prince. Some girls are passive in fairy tales, but by no means all. It's Beauty who rescues her beast, not the other way around. The stories that you heard as a child have a deep influence on you. They give you a sort of template for good conduct, a model of how to behave. They can even influence how you plan your life. Think of the stories you remember, the ones you loved as a child, and see how your own life turned out. Are there any parallels? The more you think about it, the more you'll probably see. And that's not by accident. We plan how our lives will turn out on an unconscious level. Once you know the power of stories, you might take care of what you expose to your subconscious mind. Of course, these days we need to take the old tales with a good pinch of salt. Helpless princesses aren't much good as a role model. It's no good waiting sweetly for your shining prince to come. A much better idea is to go out on an adventure with your brothers and sisters, and friends are just as good as siblings, obviously. And remember to be kind to any old men or women who you meet along the way. Seriously, when you know the power of stories, choose your influences carefully. Be aware of what you're putting into your subconscious mind. Look for empowering role models and avoid insidious ones. Take responsibility for what you feed your imagination. As you grow older, you start to weave your own personal story. Most of us do this unconsciously to start with anyway. You probably like a character from your favourite book. You take that character and you base yourself on that. It might be Matilda or Dennis the Menace, The Catcher in the Rye or A Little Princess. You remember the experiences and events that are in line with this persona. Gradually you add complementary pieces of narrative, building and modifying the picture. You seek out settings where you can behave in a way that feels synchronous with who you are. Most people do this without realizing, but that's not a very liberating way to lead your life. Most people live their lives on the default settings, never realizing that you can customize. The good news is that once you're aware of this tendency, you can do something about it, and that's where soul work comes in. You see, your life has a narrative thread. It relates where you've been and what you've done. It shows how one incident led to another. It explains why things turned out this way. It helps you make sense of things. But your life expresses a deeper story. This one links the experiences and events that matter to you. It shows how your encounters follow patterns. It relates your actions to your inner values. It helps you understand what really matters. And this is a story that you can consciously create and develop. That's not to say you can control everything that happens to you. Sometimes life throws you a curveball. Things happen and you just have to cope with them. There's no good complaining, no point in playing victim. You just get on with it. Other times, people don't do what you want. They have different ideas about their part in your story. Someone you wanted to play a starring role has other plans. You just have to accept that and get on with things. If you're caught in a riptide, you can't swim against it. It's best to go with the flow. That doesn't mean you have to feel good about it. Life can be curious, unpredictable, and downright unfair. Inner wisdom is all very well, but sometimes events leave you floundering. You might ask, what's the point of cultivating mindfulness when reality can be so harsh? When this happens, stop searching for a reason. Logical analysis will take you round in circles. Instead, just accept what's happened. The process is not so much understanding as recognition. Acknowledge what is and accept that right now you can't control everything. If you fight it, you just perpetuate negativity. If you can accept it, then you can move on. If you hear yourself saying, it shouldn't be like this, or I ought to do that, beware. Those thoughts are judgments based on unconscious belief patterns called paradigms. A paradigm is a program which might once have been relevant to you, but which you haven't examined for a while. Ancient Sanskrit teachings called them samskara. They are mental imprints based on past experience. They live in your subconscious. They're difficult to access because you're probably not really aware of them. They reproduce behaviour patterns which might once have been helpful, but are now limiting you. Should and ought are dangerous words. They take your attention away from here and now, and they smother you with feelings of guilt or indignation. Instead, just observe that thought and let it go. Accept that this is the way things are. No shame, no blame, just recognition. So appreciate the present in all its richness. Acknowledge fully what you're experiencing. Accept that you can't control everything. You might need to just go along with things for a while. When a car is skidding, you turn the wheel in that direction to regain control. And now, what you decide to do next is up to you. Manifesting your dreams isn't always straightforward. I'm not advocating headstrong perfectionism. Dreaming of perfection may stop you making the most of what you've actually got here and now. Myths and fairy tales remind us of this profound truth. Beauty has to love her beast before he turns into a prince. Jack Giantkiller swaps his cow for a single bean, though it does turn out to grow a magic beanstalk. So getting what you want is likely to be a combination of chance and hard work. Though, as Oscar Wilde said, I'm a great believer in luck. The harder I work, the more of it I seem to have. So keep moving in the direction of your dreams, and at the same time, try to work out what's really best for you, what truly fits in with the pattern of your life. Listen to the whispers. What is the story that your soul is trying to express? Now, you want to understand that you live your life on 3 levels: mind, body, and soul. Those are the 3 pillars of existence. In the physical world, you have a body which allows you to engage with other beings. On the intellectual level, your mind operates. You experience consciousness and develop ideas. On the spiritual plane, there is the soul, the aspect of you which transcends incarnate existence. Now, the physical level is very important. It allows us to reach out and actually touch another incarnate being. The intellectual level allows us to connect with others. And the spiritual level is where we evolve as human beings. If you were a car, your body would be the metalwork. Your mind would be the fuel. And the driver would be your soul. Obviously, you can plan to nourish your body to get fit. You can study and debate and train your mind. What we're talking about here is the third level, fulfilling the potential of your soul. Now, the physical level is very important. It allows us to reach out and actually touch other incarnate beings. The intellectual level allows us to connect with others, and the spiritual level is where we evolve as human beings. If you were a car, your body would be the metalwork, your mind would be the fuel, and the driver would be your soul. Obviously, you can plan to nourish your body to get fit. You can study and debate and train your mind. What we're talking about here is the third level, fulfilling the potential of your soul. So the first thing to become aware of is that there are these three different levels of existence. Then you can start to steer the car. Begin by simply observing what is happening, both outside of you and inside. When you have a strong emotion, when you feel happy or sad or scared or angry, then you must acknowledge it, name it, because we know from all the great stories, from myths and legends to fairy tales, that to name something is to connect with it. Then you have to identify the thoughts underlying those feelings, to become aware that there is a narrative that underpins the physical sensation of emotion. So you may be forming ideas or making judgments or labelling things, and your thoughts give rise to emotions. And the emotions rise and pass again, just as waves rise and fall on the surface of the ocean. That awareness can be the difference between experiencing something as frightening or exciting, exhilarating, letting you be open to new experiences. And then the third step is to say, how does this relate to my soul story? What does it say to my values, to things that have happened in the past? Is there a pattern here, something that keeps repeating because there's a lesson here that I need to learn? Because history will keep repeating itself until you learn the lessons that you need to learn. And when you reach that stage, it's like seeing a beautiful carpet spread out on the floor below you, because you can perceive the patterns, the themes and the motifs, and you can say, look, it's repeating, there's something happening here that's important to me, that ties in with who I am and with where I want to be. So by becoming aware of these three levels of existence, you understand the relationship between the past and the present and the future. Now there's a dichotomy here. On the one hand, it's vital to live in the present. The past is just a memory. The future is a fantasy. All we have is now. This moment that you're experiencing, that you're actually living. Yet at the same time, your past is a part of who you are. It's fixed, it can't be changed, it can't be denied, it's brought you to where you are today. But you can reframe the meaning of what happened in the past. You can change the relationship of that past to future elements. You can decide what will happen next in your story. And conversely, the future isn't real yet, but you can affect what will happen. So it's important to hold on to your dreams, to think about them, to focus on them, to clarify the details and to start working towards them. If you keep them as daydreams, they'll almost certainly not happen. But if you make even the smallest move towards them, you'll start going in the right direction. There's an old Chinese proverb, the longest journey starts with a single step. You need to start work on your soul story, to move yourself in the direction of your dreams. It's no good just daydreaming about what you want to happen. You have to start work on making it real. There's a wonderful word, to reify, to make something concrete or real. And the only place to start is here and now. And the only thing you can start on is yourself. which is fine, because that's the one thing you can actually control, and that is the only thing that really matters. It's like karma. Every effect needs a cause. Nothing happens by itself. Life requires your participation to make it happen. In other words, if you want to achieve your goals, whatever they may be, you need to take appropriate actions. And you get back from life what you put into it. The value of something is a direct result of the effort and energy that you expend on it. It's frightening because it's a huge responsibility. There is not any external measure of worth. As the fox says to the little prince, your flower has value because of the time you wasted on it. So only you can decide what you want to do with your life. And what matters isn't even getting that exactly right, working it all out before you start. It's actually just starting to move. And the place to start is here and now. And the person to start with is yourself. You can't control outside events. You don't make other people behave how you want, but you can work out who you are. In the words of the Delphic oracle, Nothi Sauton, know thyself. And from there you can work out who you want to be. And you can start working towards that. To have the life you want, you need to be the sort of person who would live that life. So what's stopping you making the first move? Maybe you don't really want it enough. Perhaps it would mean too much disruption. It's not worth the cost. Possibly you're worried about your health, or coping with the uncertainty, or letting other people down. Well, that's fine. You just need to be honest with yourself and work on making the best of what you've got. Other times your dream is so big it seems crazy even to imagine it. Even if it would be wonderful, especially if it would be wonderful. What makes you think that you could ever deserve such fame or love or happiness? Aim so high and you'll end up falling on your nose. Better not to try. At least that way no one can laugh at you. But that's no way to live. You can't live the same year 90 times and call it a life. The trick here isn't to despair and to give up. It's actually to aim a little higher. If you aim for the stars, you just might crash land on the moon. Your soul story integrates your past and your future. It makes sense of what happened and connects it with what's to come. It lets you gain a sense of direction and meaning in life. That doesn't mean you can decide everything. It doesn't mean anything is decided, but it does mean that you live with awareness. As they say in Hawaii, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And your story is unique. If you don't live your soul story, no one else will do it for you. Life is like a game of cards. You've got an ace, and you can choose whether to play it high or low, to make the most of what you've got, or just the best of what you've been given. That means that you have a gift to give a world, and with that gift comes a huge responsibility to live life as well as it can be lived, to do justice to your time here on earth. We plan our lives according to a dream that comes to us in childhood, and we find that life makes us alter our plans. Yet at the end we look back and we see that our dream was our destiny. It all turned out according to that childhood dream. It's just that fate had other ideas about how we'd get there. Understanding your soul story lets you work out who you are and where you want to be. The future will arrive whether you're ready for it or not. If you don't plan the life you want, you're going to spend a long time living a life you haven't planned. Now that you know it doesn't have to be that way, you can start to make sense of what's happened in your life. You can connect where you were with who you want to be. You have one life that we know about anyway, and we can speak of it like a journey with a destination, but in fact it's more like a song or a dance. You don't listen to a symphony just waiting to get to the final chord. You hear the melody and the harmony and the counterpoint all existing simultaneously as part of the composition. With a dance, the point is to keep moving while the music is being played. With a story, say a fairy story like Red Riding Hood, it doesn't matter that you know what's going to happen. In fact, that just adds to the richness. The beginning is implicit in the end, just as the end is previsaged in the beginning. Creating your soul story is about living a life that's meaningful. It's linking together the people, places and events that matter to you. It's looking at themes and patterns, connections and relationships. Doing soul work is about weaving the fabric of your life. When you tell me your story, you're relating how your soul has expressed itself in this world. Your favourite fairy story was Hansel and Gretel, where the children go off into the woods, they become lost, they have to be very clever in dealing with the witch, and they eventually find their way home again. And now you're home again. Can you see some parallels in your life where maybe you had to make your own journey into the unknown and be clever to survive?
That works.
That works for you. I'm glad you're home again. Cinderella is one of the oldest fairy stories in the world. There are literally hundreds of different versions of it, going right back to ancient China, and there's one in ancient Egypt called The Rose-Red Slipper. It's a story which has a number of versions, and when people think of it nowadays, we often relate it to the rather Disneyfied version of the story. But it's a story that has very much deeper roots. For example, in many versions, the mother's grave has a tree which grows watered by the girl's tears, and Cinderella is much more proactive, doesn't just depend on her fairy godmother, but it's the tree which gives her what she needs. So a story can influence us very, very deeply, even when we don't directly relate to the content consciously. And perhaps what you found is that there are certain elements of the story which have had resonance for you that aren't necessarily present in the Disney version, but which you were able to sense in the deeper story. And the elements of having to cope on your own, of rejection, of dealing with things yourself, are very empowering. Of course, at the end, when Cinderella unites with her prince, we don't have to see that as being some external knight in shining armour. We can say it's uniting with herself. So what she needs to do is to fuse the different parts of her personality as she grows up. It's very Jungian. She goes from being a dependent child, in which the very feminine, soft side of her personality is imposed upon, to learning to stand up for herself, put up her own boundaries, and defend herself, and then she's ready to go out into the world. Nursery rhymes are extremely interesting, and when you went past your old school, you heard the children singing the same songs as they sang 60 years ago when you were a child. The reason that songs survive is that they tell us something very, very deep about ourselves. It's really Darwinian. A story or a song is successful if it survives, and it survives by being repeated. A story is successful if you hear a story and then you tell it to someone else. A nursery rhyme or a song the same. And so these are songs which deal with themes at different levels, but which relate to us very, very deeply, and that's why. The question is about personality and how it affects crafting our soul story. The concept of karma is very, very interesting, and as we've said, karma really operates both ways. It's not just that people do things and then have to pay for them or be rewarded. It's also the other way round, that whatever we do affects the world, that every effect needs a cause, that life requires us to take part in order for things to happen. In earlier books I've written about archetypes. My first book, Life Works, analyses the archetypal patterns, and I would say that there is such a thing as personality, but that all of the archetypes are potentially present in all of us. So the light and the dark, the young and the old, the masculine and the feminine, as Jung would say, the animus and the anima, they're all inside each of us. Now, people sometimes say, but I don't want to have all the archetypes. I want to be good. I want to be a good character. Of course, it's important to make the world a good place, to leave the world richer for us having been here. Sometimes to do that, we need to call on the power of the darker archetypes. So if there's environmental pollution happening in the river, it's no good just saying, well, that's not very nice, is it? We've got to call on the power of the ogre and say, if the river is polluted, then we will enact legislation that means that these people pay for it. And in that case, the power of the ogre is called upon to do good. In Bali, they say that the ogres and the demons can be tamed. If you give an offering to a demon, he becomes your guardian spirit, a little bit like taming a dog and letting it become your own guard dog. And it's no good just going for the fluffy pink archetypes. If you want white light, it contains all the colours of the rainbow. I trained as an anthropologist and worked for a number of years in third world development, visiting poor communities, and I found that in those communities, if we wanted to reach people, we needed to know their stories. It was no good us going in with ideas of how we could make their lives better. We needed to listen to the people and find out what they wanted. But people in disadvantaged groups are often very reluctant to ask outright for what they want. What they may do, however, is tell you a story about someone else in a similar situation and what would have helped them. And so you have to listen to their stories and find out what their lives are actually like. And then I realised that we're very much storytelling animals. We make sense of the world through stories. That's how we link events into a causal sequence and say, this is why things turned out the way they did. So that's what brought me to looking at stories and the power. So my second book, StoryWorks, is a collection of more than 80 stories from different times and places around the world, which you can read as examples, as lessons, and just as a way of relating to the power of story. The stories have to be real. Stories are real at a very deep level. We make sense of things by linking events together, so we can tell ourselves stories about why things are the way they are. That's a linear pattern of events. The thing about creating your soul story is that it's looking at something deeper. It's looking at the themes, the patterns, the motifs that are... We tend to fall into patterns. We tend to live our lives in ways that are familiar and comfortable to us. Once we become aware that we can craft our own stories, it enables us to move beyond that. If you've come to a dead end, sometimes it's possible to see around the corner. If you're going along a path that you're very happy with, sometimes it lets you see that you could actually change direction, maybe just by 1 or 2 degrees, and end up somewhere quite different. So the idea of soul work is that you're able to create something that's in line with who you want to be, how you want to live your life. Really good point. I'm very aware here that we've got a time limit, but I think it's absolutely true that you can become much, much more creative. An analogy might be if you had a colouring book, a template, and some people just colour very carefully inside the lines on their template, and other people splash paint over it and combine things and move them together and go outside the edges, right to the edge of the piece of paper. And I think it's studying your soul story, crafting your own soul story, lets you go right to the edges of the paper to really make the most of this life and of what you've got.